What is up, New Beginnings Church? Happy Monday morning to you and welcome to our devotional series. We are on the back end now of our walk through the book of Colossians. We're kind of wrapping on the end of chapter 3. There's only 4 chapters in the book of Colossians, but it's been so good. And this week is going to be really cool. In this section now, you got to remember that when Paul wrote, he did not write with chapter and verses. He just wrote one continuous letter. So later, people came along and added chapter and verse so that we could find stuff easier. And so what you see is that by this week, he's about to flip. He's done this before. In the book of Ephesians, he does this. The first half of the letter is very theologically driven. The second half of the letter is very practical, application driven. And he does a little bit the same here. He's about to switch into, I think, really, really practical. But what he says is so important here in these first few verses, because what he does is he introduces, in essence to me, what I would call the filter. There's a filter that he's going to give you by which you discern all the application. And when you get into the application, if it doesn't go through this filter, you've made a wreck of it all. Does that make sense? And so we'll talk the whole week. We're going to pull it all together into one nice tidy package. But this is how it goes. Verse 12 says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves." We talked about that last week. There is a uniform to being a Christ follower. There's a clothing, a uniform that we wear. And he says, you clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And so again, we talked about all those beautiful things last week. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And so this is where he pivots now a little bit. He goes, and over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. So all that stuff we talked about last week, what it means to look like, smell like, talk like, and walk like a Christ follower, all those things, he ends up giving you this thing that says, actually, it's love that is the filter over all of these things. So the ultimate virtue of life is love. The supreme ethic of life is love. The very nature of God is love. Let me just say it like this. The most important thing in the world is love. And I can prove it to you real easy. And again, it becomes the filter by which you express all the other things like gentleness, compassion, kindness, gentleness, all those things. It's also going to become the filter for what he talks about next, which we'll cover in the next few days to come. But if nothing more, and you've heard me say this before too, and I like repeating myself because I think it is the most crucial thing to being a Christ follower. Remember, the most important thing in the world is love. And I'll prove it to you. Because Jesus said, this new command that I give to you, that you love one another. So Jesus said, look, I know the Old Testament's full of all kinds of commands. There's over 600 of them. I'm just telling you, I can give you one. Let me just boil it all down. Love one another even as I have loved you. When he talked about what it looked like to be a disciple, he said, this is how they'll know that you're one of my disciples, by how you love one another. So don't miss this. If anything you do, and you could be theologically accurate and doctrinally accurate, and you could have... if it's not bathed and clothed and covered in love, you have missed the point. Paul says as much. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is, again, not a wedding poem. It's actually connected to church interactions and people and relationships and getting along and building the kingdom together. He goes, look, if you do all the miracles, if you've got all the doctrines, if you've got all the wisdom, if you've got all the whatever, but it's not covered in love, you are the obnoxious sound of a clanging gong. And then of course, he describes what love is. It is an amazing poem. But at the bottom, he goes, in the end, there's faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is, yeah, you guessed it, love. Peter says this. Peter says, above all else. Now, again, he had just written a few chapters of what we now call Holy Scripture. But to summarize it, near the end, he says, above all else, love one another, because love covers a multitude of sin. And so I could do this with some of the other apostles too. And so certainly with John, if you go read 1 John chapter 1 and 2 and 3, oh my gosh, the whole thing is on how love is the ultimate expression of who God is. Therefore, if you know God, the ultimate expression of love is flowing through you and how you treat one another. And that's something I want to drive home today, is that the greatest reflection of whether or not you walk with Jesus, the greatest reflection is how you treat other people and your ability to love one another. And so I can't emphasize that enough. Church, I love you so much. Let us be a Christ followers today. Again, we've clothed ourselves with all those things like compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience. We're bearing with one another. We're forgiving one another. But the motive of it all, the driving force behind it all, is that God is love and that God loved us. And now that love is flowing through us. Can I get an amen to that? Church, I love you guys. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.